I met him when I was working in a pub. I met him the end of November 2007, and I just fell head over heels in love with him at first glance. He was handsome, charming, swept me off my feet, and it just snowballed from there. It was a real whirlwind. I thought I'd met the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. He seemed so caring and attentive, and really just the most amazing man ever. I couldn't believe he was single. He was that good catch. And the relationship moved very quickly. And by the March, I found out I was pregnant with my son, who's now 6. I think the facade that he portrayed to me as this amazing man was starting to ebb away, because he wasn't really the person he portrayed to me when I first met him. He was very moody, very controlling, very manipulative. It started with just small things. Don't like that lipstick, or are you wearing that jumper, or you've been outside a long time, talking to the window cleaner. Just really small things. And as time went on, I had a difficult pregnancy because I'm diabetic. He said that he was never available to attend appointments with me, so I was very much on my own, and I just knew it wasn't how it should be. It wasn't this perfect romance that I'd dreamt I was in. Petty rows that you'd have with a partner became massive rows, with things being smashed, doors being pulled off their hinges, and it just got worse from there. It was definitely worse while I was pregnant. Throughout the relationship, I was just trying to hold the family unit together. You know, I wanted him to be the man I thought he was. I did love him. For all his faults, I loved him. He was my son's father. However, you know, never judge a book by its cover, because he wasn't on the inside how he seemed on the outside. And then I explained to my sister that I wasn't going to take the house we'd found, and she basically gave me tough love and said, look, if you continue to live with that man, I'm finished with you. And, you know, I didn't have much support, and I hadn't even told her half of it, because I felt, oh, I can handle it, I can deal with him, I can cope with him. He's just a bit stressed at the moment, but it's just a gradual erosion of your self-confidence and your self-esteem, until one day you just wake up and look in the mirror and think, this is not right, this is not how life should be. You shouldn't have to live in fear of anybody. I did give him another chance, probably about his 20th chance. I was very weak by the time it had come to this point, until basically he gambled the house from over our heads and we were going to be homeless. And I went and rented a property, and he went in my bag and he found a letter with the new address on. He threatened to burn the house down, and I still didn't tell anyone. I was trying to slowly move things out, as well as trying to keep things normal for the kids. I had no money. I owed nursery fees because he'd taken that money out the bank. I literally had nothing, and I was trying to cope on my own. And I always remember I was in work on the Friday afternoon, and he rang me, and he was really abusive. And I just thought, no, I've got to do something. I've got to do something for my children's sake, because this is wrong. I was dreading going home, but I had to go home because my children lived there. We had no roof over our heads. I had nowhere to go. And I phoned Lower Lane Police Station, and I spoke to a lady in the domestic violence unit. I'd been reluctant to do it on occasions where he'd been violent and hurt me in the past, nights when we had to barricade me and the kids into a bedroom, because he hadn't, in my mind, committed a crime that the police were interested in. Once I spoke to the lady and she took some details, I started to feel this immense sense of relief. I'd worried that contacting the police would make things worse. But once somebody from outside the home knew, things couldn't go back to the way they were. So in a way, it forced my hand to leave, and that's what I needed. After that, the abuse carried on. He'd stalked me. He'd sit in the entry opposite my house. He'd follow my car. He'd follow my kids home, my eldest boy, to the train station. My friends would text me and say he's sitting at the end of the road. If I went with a friend in a car, he'd be following the car. He'd climb into the back garden and move things in the garden, steal items off the washing line, wait for me to come in and try and get in the house as I was bringing the children in at the end of the day, till I lived like a prisoner. We lived all summer. We couldn't open a window because he'd try and get in the house.
Were you in contact with the police?
I was. They put a tag on my line, which meant I didn't have to speak. I just virtually had to phone 999 and they'd come to the property. And that was very reassuring to know I had that. And I also, you know, I'd see them passing. They did look out. They did look after the house. They did look out for us. And then when the threats began to get worse, I realised then that I had to go back to the police and say, look, this is what he's threatening me with, which I did. And they went out and warned him on a number of occasions, or they'd go to the house and find him drunk. The attack happened on the 1st of September, and the Friday before, a couple of days before, he rang me and said, watch your back, you're in for a massive shock. And I heard a scraping noise in the back garden. And I went and I looked, and I had a deck chair in the garden at the time. It looked like it had moved, but I couldn't see anyone. And then I went to open the door to let the cat out, about 11:15. And I turned the key in the lock, and the barrel of the lock was broken, and the key spun round. And I opened the door, and he was literally there to me, and hit me there with a hammer. As you can see my scar. I put my head forward because of the immense pain, and he continued to hit me all around this area of my head with a hammer. He tried to remove my pyjama bottoms, said he was going to rape me. I didn't scream, I didn't shout, I didn't call out, because I knew if my eldest son had come down, if he heard it, he would attack him. I tried to fight him off. He threw me, kicked me, punched me. I lost 2 teeth. This happened in the garden. I managed to get inside and was trying to shut the door, but he just overpowered me. He was over 6 foot, and he'd been in the army. He was a big guy. And I was just on the floor at this point, and he hit me several more times here. And I remember looking down at his shoes and thinking it must be raining in my kitchen, but it was actually my blood hitting his shoe and bouncing off. The kitchen was covered in blood, and at this point he slipped, and the hammer flew out of his hand and over my head into the back dining room, at which point I felt something really cold and sharp on my neck. And I put my hand up to pull it off, and it was a long knife that he brought with him. And he cut my throat with it, he cut my hands, he cut the tops off my fingers, and obviously I passed out. And he left when he thought I was dead. I came round, I didn't know how long I'd been out, I didn't know whether he was still in the house. I knew I couldn't get to the children, I didn't know whether he'd attacked them. I pushed myself against the back door to try and stop him coming in if he was still in the garden. I had no recollection of time. I couldn't save myself, I was so weak. And I realised I needed to do something. Crawled into the dining room to where I'd remembered putting the phone when I'd spoken to my sister, and just managed to feel my way from the floor for the phone, and I rang 999 and the police were there within minutes, because I crawled to the hall and opened the door for the police, and they kept me talking on the phone. And then when the police came, I don't know if it was just relief, I passed out again, and when I next came round I was in the ambulance, and all I can remember is obviously I was vomiting because of the trauma to my body. I was just covered in blood, and I just kept thinking, my boys, and that was all I wanted, to make sure that my boys were safe. I had police at the end of the bed in Exactly till they found him, and he'd gone on the run. One of my neighbours had seen him running off, and he'd gone on the run, but he later told the police that he'd left when he thought he'd killed me. And 2 days later, the police told me that they'd found him where he was from, Stockton-on-Tees, and he was arrested and charged, and he claimed self-defence, said he'd hit me once, said I was lying, I was jeered by his family, I was sent abusive messages by his family, and the support from the police was just fantastic, absolutely amazing. You know, it really was. I knew I could turn to them for anything. They helped me through up the whole process. It went to the trial in February. The trial was due to start on the 9th of February. I wasn't due to give evidence till the 10th, which was the Tuesday. And on the Monday, still claiming he'd only hit me once, a medical report, which was sought from his legal team, was disclosed to both sides, and it just blew it out the window. You know, the doctor said I was probably 2 more hits with the hammer away from death, and only that I've got a huge amount of curly hair. It saved my life. So I do have sort of 10 to 15 holes under my head, in my scalp there, And obviously I've still got the scar which goes onto my nose. He fractured my skull. He tried to cut my breast off. He tried to rape me. He said if he couldn't have me, no one was to have me, and he wanted me to be as unattractive as possible to anybody else. He just destroyed every part of my life, not just physically. And then, you know, he changed his plea, and he was remanded to be sentenced in the March. And I went to the sentencing, and he came in and made an abusive gesture at me behind the glass. And his family were told if they shouted or jeered at me once more, they'd be removed from the courtroom. And Judge Mark Brown, I'll always remember his words. He said he was a cruel and manipulative man who would stop at nothing to achieve his own gain. And he was sentenced to an indeterminable sentence with a recommendation to serve life for my attempted murder, with a minimum term of 9 years. He was also given a concurrent sentence of 2.5 years for stalking. And I went to see him in prison 18 months ago and asked him why he did what he did. And he said he just wanted to hurt me because I was getting on with my life, and I had left him, but not on his terms, which again just reinforced the control and the manipulation. So I just don't want anyone to go through what I went through and what my children suffered, because I am lucky to be able to sit here and tell this story today.